On today's Retro Tech Repair, we're going to be repairing this Onko Super Space Jack that I bought spares or repair on eBay. So here is our Onko Super Space Jack. I must admit, when I bought this, I'd never seen or heard of this game before, so this is really a new experience for me. Some of the other games, Astro Wars, Munchman, I've heard of all of those. Never heard of this one. So looks like it's quite worn on the back. LSI Super Space Jack. There's some instructions on there, can't really read them. Onko Electronics, made in Japan. The seller has very kindly stuck a piece of plastic on there, which looks like it's gone missing from here on the battery compartment. There's another one about to go there, so if that's not pretty secure, I might remove that and stick that on there anyway. Other side looks to be good. Looks to take two AA cells. Oh dear, nearly broke that one too. In fact, yeah, looks like that one has broken, not by me, but already. But we don't have the piece of broken plastic for that one. That's good news is though, it seems that one of those clips is enough to keep it in place. It's really, really stiff though. Okay, we'll leave those aside for the time being. Rattle to it. Not quite sure what that is. Maybe it feels like the display is bouncing around, or something's bouncing around in there. It actually feels like the display. It's pretty heavy. I hope the display hasn't hit something and broken in there, because really there's nothing I can do if that has happened. But yeah, interesting thing. Quite a few cosmetic scratches on the screen. I don't know if you can see those. Fortunately, no printing, so maybe I'll be able to polish some of those out with a little bit of patience. Some wear on the labels. Joystick springy. Buttons appear to work. No cracks or other obvious cosmetic damage, although it does look like maybe these screws have been opened or tampered with. So I think maybe someone's been in here, and I just don't like that rattling noise that it's making there. That makes me worry about the integrity of the VFD display. Anyway, power switch. Oh, super stiff. Yeah, I'm not sure that's working at all. We'll put some batteries in it though and see if we can get it to do anything. Before that, let's take a look at the eBay listing. Super rare Onko Super Space Jack vintage 1981 electronic game. Space Invaders. I paid £18.80 plus £3.10 shipping, so just a little shy of 22 UK pounds. It's a bit of a long description for this one, so I'm not going to go through it all in detail. Offers considered. Super rare Onko Super Space Jack vintage 1981 electronic game. Condition is used and sold as not working. However, with a bit of attention, this could work. I don't know how the seller comes to that conclusion, but that's the conclusion he or she came to. One of the back battery holders does not stay clicked and is damaged. Dispatched really well packaged by courier. The seller then goes on to big up the game a bit and then writes quite a long paragraph on LEDs. They use light-emitting diodes to create displays made of lights. Later LED games use vacuum fluorescent displays. And so on. This of course isn't accurate. Vacuum fluorescent displays, or VFDs, and light-emitting diodes, or LEDs, are quite different display technologies. But I'm sure the seller had only the very best of intentions, so let's get on with the repair. Let's see if we can get this to... The switch is very stiff, like I say. Doesn't seem to want to turn on at all. And even when it does turn on, completely dead. No sound, no image, nothing. So yeah, definitely spares or repair. Okay, so there's no hiding it. We've got a bit of a problem with the audio on this one. I was trying out some new pieces of equipment. The two didn't seem to be particularly compatible, and so the sound is a bit up and down through this one. It does get better towards the end. I hope you stick with it and it's not too intrusive. It is a VFD display. It's a little bit loose. It looks like the adhesive that holds it in place has come away. But the getter compound is intact, or the getter is intact. Two getter spots there. So that's really good, because it does indicate that in fact this hasn't gone to air, because if it had gone to air and we got air in there, there wasn't much we could do about it. This switch that we were having trouble with before does seem very corroded, and I do wonder whether that might be the cause of the problem. it looks like there's some deposits on the board, like maybe something's been spilled on it or something like that. There's a little daughter board down here, which surprises me. That seems to have a transformer on it, so I'm guessing that's the transformer for the VFD display. Has a kind of old electronic smell to it, which is kind of interesting. Quite a big PCA. It's flexing a little bit when I'm pressing on it. I need to be aware of that. But I do wonder whether we're getting power through that switch, so that's probably the first thing that I'm going to check. Alright, we'll get our meter on continuity. And I'm just going to flip this over if I can and see if I can see the switch here. It looks like it's just 3 poles. So in one position we'd expect 2 of the contacts to be connected together. And that's those 2. That's the off position where it is at the moment. And then we're going to try and flick it and see if we get continuity the other way. It seems a more positive action than it was before. So now we'd expect continuity between these 2. And that is there. So it's also still there, which is not what I expected. Oh, it looks like these 2 are in fact soldered together. So there's a track runs between these 2, so that when it's in the off position, like so, there's continuity here because these 2 are connected together, but there's nothing here or here. And then when it's in the on position, we have still the continuity there because there's a track between them, but also the continuity there. So the next thing I'm going to look at is this DC jack. Sometimes these jacks kind of crust up as well, and this looks like it's had some moisture on it. In fact, there's some kind of deposits also in the lid here. I don't know if you can see that. There's some marks on the inside of the display. Another source of problems typically with these games I've found is this connector. If it's been used with a power supply a lot, sometimes these things aren't connecting as they should, and they're stopping the power getting from the battery to the printed circuit assembly. So I'm also going to check the continuity on this. I think the way that they work is they have a little switch in there that just stops when you plug the power supply, and it stops the power supply connecting to the batteries and trying to charge the batteries, because that wouldn't be a good thing for it to do. But if you're trying to run it off batteries and that is stuck or corroded, then what it means is that the batteries are not connected to the board. So we're going to take a look at that and see if the connectivity is there where we'd expect it to be as well. Okay, so we have a positive and a negative coming into the board here. The positive comes from the positive terminal of the battery here. There are 2 batteries in here. Then the negative, that comes across here. Again, connects to the positive at this side, and then 2 more batteries, and then the negative. So collectively, those 4 AA cells form a, what would it be, 6-volt battery, thereabouts. And then the result of that comes into the board here. That then is these 2 pins here. The negative one, which is the lower one, comes down to here, which is the connector here, and then goes off and does its thing. I don't think there's a break in that. There's no switch on that. That's just doing what it's supposed to do. The positive comes in, and then that connects to this terminal here. And then when the switch is closed, which is how it should be now, to that terminal there. So that's working as well. So it really should work from batteries. It looks like the battery voltage is connected to the main printed circuit assembly, and it's not been stopped by this switch here. So it looks like we're going to have to do some more diagnostics on our Onko Super Space Jack. So I decide to separate the printed circuit assembly from the plastics in order to give myself a little bit more room to work. So that's the positive, and then, sorry, that was the negative, and this is the positive. Okay, great. Okay, so now we have the, oh no, there's piezo sound to do as well. And again, I do make a note where those go, but I do want to remove it from the printed circuit assembly, not from the sounder, because I don't have a lot of luck soldering onto those piezo crystals. so I'm going to try and avoid doing that if I can. They're not polarity dependent, but I do need a second pair of hands to kind of do this, really, but we'll manage. There we go, one, and hopefully the other I can get to without straining the cable. Okay, good. So it would have been useful in some ways to have that connected up, because I would have been able to hear if the processor sprung into life, whereas when the display didn't work. But now we'll just have to hope that it all comes to life together, if in fact we can get it working, which is always a bit of a challenge. Okay, so it's the next day. I've had a bit of a tidy up and I'm going to start testing the components on the board. Just a quick visual inspection of the board. I see a crystal, some resistors, some diodes, some resistor arrays, some electrolytic capacitors, and then a couple of ceramic capacitors as well, and then obviously the microprocessor. So then I'm going to just visually inspect these caps, and I don't see any leaking, I don't see any bulging, so I'm probably going to leave those as they are. When I look at the resistors, I don't see any burning or anything like that, and in the absence of any physical damage to a resistor, my experience has been they tend to stay pretty stable, and the same for these ceramic capacitors here. They seem to be pretty stable too, so I'm not going to mess too much with those. What I am going to look at, and what I've had problems with in the past, are the diodes, and if there are any transistors on there, those as well. I have my meter in diode test mode, and the way that this will work is I would expect to see no conductivity in one direction. In the other direction, I'd expect to see the diode start to conduct at about 0.7, 0.8 volts, something like that. And I see two on the board here. Well, this is the first one, D1. It's just tucked away below the display. And in that direction, it's showing 0.7 of a volt voltage drop. And then in the other direction, let's just check that. No conductivity, which is exactly what we'd expect. I think we have another diode on the board here. That looks like a Zener diode, ZD1. What that means is it will conduct in one direction, and then at another direction it will also conduct when it reaches its Zener voltage, but I'm not quite sure what that's going to be in relation to the meter. So anyway, in this direction it's showing a 0.8 or 0.9 volt drop, and then in the other direction it should be like the other if we've not reached the Zener voltage, and it is. So nothing in one direction, but in the other direction about 0.8 of a volt voltage drop across that Zener diode, which is about what we would expect. So then it looks like there are other components on this daughter board here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that, but in there we have a transformer, we have 1, 2 or 3 diodes, and then maybe even more. Let's have a look. 1, 2, no, I think I can see three diodes in there, a couple of resistors, and 1 transistor. And that transistor is marked C1383. And when I Google C1383, I discovered that actually is an NPN transistor. So an NPN transistor, as the name implies, has 2 negatives and a positive, NPN, and that relates to the doping of the semiconductor when it's put together. But essentially what it means is that it's like 2 diodes back to back, and I've explained that many times before. So we're going to test it with the diode tester again. So I have my positive on what I think is the P in the NPN, and I'm going to go on one of the ends, and I see my voltage drop, and I'm going to go onto the other pin N, and I see nothing. So it looks like that's open circuit. So that transistor now is suspect to me, so I'm going to take it out of the board and test it on the bench. It's an awkward spot, but I might just be able to, there we go, get it out without disturbing the things around it. And there it is. Boy, the legs are very short on it, but hopefully I can fit it in to the tester. Certainly, I can test it on the bench. And I think that has confirmed what we knew already. This actually is a faulty transistor. So I did manage to find one of those transistors online, so I've ordered a new one. In the meantime, I'm going to take the opportunity to check the diodes on here, and there are 4 diodes total. Just want to make sure that they are alright before I solder in the new transistor when it comes. This one looks good, 0.7 of a volt. That one's 0.6 of a volt. 0.7 of a volt, or 0.8, and then maybe that one's the other way around. Yes, it is. 0.7. Okay, so there are 4 other diodes on that board. They are good. I can't really test the transformer, and I think the cap and the resistors are going to be just fine. So really, now all I can do now until my new transistor arrives is to, well, I'm going to stick that back down, and then I'm going to clean up the plastics. So I'm going to use a little bit of this tape to stick down this board here. This is actually number plate tape. I got it from Halfords, which is kind of the equivalent if you are a US viewer of Pet Boys or Advanced AutoZone, something like that. I didn't buy it for this purpose, I bought it to, oddly enough, attach a number plate. Or a license plate, I suppose. Okay. Hopefully that will stay in place now and stop kind of flapping around hitting the inside of the plastics when I do get those plastics cleaned up. So we do have quite a lot of scratches on this screen. There's no cracks, which is good, and no printing, which is good, because I recently did a repair and I polished off the display, but I also polished off some of the screen printing on it, which I was really upset about. So there's nothing on here that I need to worry about that. I'm going to try and polish this out now using a kind of car color restorer style polish, and we'll come back in a second, well not a second, probably quite a few minutes actually when I've done that. So we'll take a look at what that looks like when I've polished it back up. Okay, so that's polished up okay. It's not perfect, but I really wasn't aiming for it to be perfect. I could probably have got it that way had I spent a bit more time on it, but it wouldn't have matched the rest of the game. It would have looked a bit strange, so I think that bit of patina is okay. I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of this cleaned up with a toothbrush now, and then we'll await the return or the arrival of the transistor that we ordered, and we'll put everything together and see if it works. So that's about it. We'll give it a final polish when we've reassembled it. So it's been about a week since we last looked at our Onko Super Space Jack, and in that time I'm very fortunate my little package arrived, and in that package were these 2 transistors, which is great, and they are a, let's remind myself again, a C1383 transistor. I got 2 of these on eBay. They're quite expensive, isn't they? Like a $5 each or something like that, I forget. But they weren't cheap, and I'm going to now try and slide that into this board without having to unsolder the board. So it might be a little bit fiddly to get in, but I think I'm going to be able to do it. All right, good. Okay, let's get that soldered in. Yeah, I think that's good. Chop the legs off. I'm going to leave myself a little bit of spare for now, just in case this wasn't the problem and I need to reuse that part. It's not very straight in the board, but I don't think that matters too much. What I should have done is pop this in the transistor test. So let me take the example, the second one of the 2 that I bought, and we'll pop it in the transistor tester just briefly and make sure it's recognized as a transistor. There we go, NPN transistor, perfect. Okay, so we had the problem before, it wasn't recognizing it as a transistor, it was an unknown part, but clearly it knows it to be a transistor now. So I'm quite excited now to get this connected up and see if it will play, so let's go ahead and do that. So I've dimmed the lights a little in anticipation of us trying our Super Space Jack. I've got my transistor soldered in there. It's a little bit wonky, but it's going to be just fine. I didn't have to remove the daughter board in order to get it in, so that was advantageous. I've dimmed the lights a little, so we're going to connect this up to my bench power supply. That power supply is set to 6 volts. Well, 5.9 I think it is actually. And we will experience this together for the first time. What I'm going to do is just going to zoom in on the display a little bit so as I flick this switch, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so here goes. Nothing. Nothing at all. Well, that's disappointing. That's disappointing. Let's try it a few more times. Ah! Hey! Look at that! Fantastic! Alright, so it's come up that time. I don't know why it's intermittent. It seems alright now. So I think what happened here was actually I probably just had a poor connection to my bench power supply. If you scroll back a little bit, you'll see I just caught the cable before I tried the switch the second time. But nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and clean the switch with some switch contact cleaner. And to satisfy the electrolytic cap fetishists out there, I'm going to replace those two because there's only 3 of them and they're easy to get to. So that's going to give me an opportunity to use my newly acquired switch cleaning lubricant. So first squirt ever. Well, for me. And we'll give that a few goes back and forwards. And I'm quite excited to get this because I've used electrical contact cleaner before, but that's kind of deposit free, whereas this claims to have a lubricant as well. So I think that's going to work better for these games. So perhaps I don't need to recap it, but since I have caps, I have kind of a selection of caps that I bought on Amazon. Maybe not the best quality, but perhaps better than ones that are 40 years old or something like that. I may as well go ahead and recap this anyway. So on there we have a this is a 100 microfarad cap at 35 volts. This one is a 10 microfarad at looks like 35 volts, and this one I think also is a 10 at 25 volts. So for completeness, I'm going to clean this connector with a little bit of IPA. Just going to take some IPA there and dip the connector in it, and I'm going to work it back and forwards a bit. So all we have to do now is put everything back together, and we can take a look at the finished game. So here it is, our finished Onko Super Space Jacker, and you have to admire the styling, don't you? Kind of a Starship Enterprise, or maybe a giant magnifying glass, who knows, but definitely an exercise in form over function. Certainly somebody's put some design effort into this with this big kind of bulbous screen that gets scratched all the time, I'm sure. Anyway, we're going to plug it in, or at least switch it on. I don't think I'm going to plug it in. I have batteries in it now, and let's take a look at the gameplay. So the gameplay is pretty simple. There are 1 or on a higher level 2 flying saucers. You fire at it, it fires back at you. One peculiarity is that once you've fired a missile, you have to move left or right before you can fire again. So you can't just sit there pounding the fire key. Let's see how it works in practice. It's a little bit frustrating for me, being used to different kind of game controls, that once you've deployed a missile you have to move before you can deploy another one. It seems a little strange, but once you get used to it, I'm sure it's quite fun. And I would imagine to have one of these as a kid when you were, well in my case I'd probably be about 12, would be just an amazing thing to have. Just look at it. It looks incredible. The kids would want to see what it was, and it plays, you know, as well as probably many of the games, if not the very best of the games from its generation. So on the higher levels of gameplay, you get 2 flying saucers to shoot at, and that shoot back at you. And it all gets a bit frantic, but there's no advancing of the aliens on you in the same way that there is in perhaps something like Astro Wars. So it does become a case of just mashing the fire button, although you do need to move left or right between each shot. Well, that about wraps it up for our Onko Super Space Jack, and what can I say? It's too big to go in your pocket, it's too small to be called a tabletop. It's got a big bulbous display which is going to reflect the light in anything other than perfect playing conditions until it becomes massively scratched, which inevitably it will. The gameplay isn't great, and I absolutely love it. I mean, how could you not look at it? It's just gorgeous. So I really hope you've enjoyed the video today. So sometimes I think I'm my own worst enemy for featuring rare and obscure things on a channel that I'm trying to develop and build. Nobody's ever going to search on something that they haven't heard of. With that in mind, I'd be very grateful if you could leave a comment letting me know whether you'd like to see more or less of this kind of thing and what you thought of the video today. But I do hope you've enjoyed taking a look at this Onko Super Space Jack, and until next time, I'd just like to thank you so much for watching Retro Tech Repair. I'll play. Oops. And off we come with the lid.